If it's been a while since you've seen a movie that was truly, and I mean truly, f***ed up, all of these movies are definitely f***ed up. They're all available on Netflix right now. And there's really no horror movies on this list, but these are all movies I recommend, starting with my number 10 pick, which I know was a poorly reviewed movie, Gamer. And not only do I know that it was poorly reviewed, I also know why. This is a brash, in-your-face action movie that doesn't really pull any punches, and there's some silly elements to it, but I love all of that stuff. Gamer is a wild ride. It takes place in the future where video games have sort of taken over. I mean, you could make the argument that has already happened, but in this future, death row inmates are thrown into this real game where they're actually shooting at each other, and it's big, over-the-top, first-person shooter stuff because a video game player is actually controlling them. I know it's a silly idea, but Gamer actually brings it to life in a pretty effective way for a B-level action movie. And this movie's got a great visual style, and even though it was released over 10 years ago, it's surprising how closely they predicted the current state of video games and social media, and it's presented in a very gross way in this movie. This movie does not have a kind view of humanity, but that's what makes it disturbing, and that's why it makes the list. My number 9 pick is actually the newest movie on this entire list, and one of the newest movies on Netflix, The Pale Blue Eye, starring Christian Bale.
Another cadet is missing.
Poe, I need you to discreetly infiltrate the cadets.
What is this?
Blood, symbols, rituals.
Oh my lord.
This period piece is not only a mystery movie, but it also features Edgar Allan Poe, or a young Edgar Allan Poe, played by Harry Melling. He does a fantastic job as the character, and it is a pretty great murder mystery movie, even if it is a bit old-fashioned. This is from director Scott Cooper, who has worked with Christian Bale a few times on Out of the Furnace and Hostels, and I do think The Pale Blue Eye is an excellent Netflix original movie. It's one of those Netflix originals, if I had gone to the theater, I probably would have been a little bit disappointed, but as a Netflix original, I was pleasantly surprised. It's a bit slow-paced, it feels a little old-fashioned as a result, but if you've got the time for a murder mystery that's over 2 hours, then The Pale Blue Eye definitely checks a lot of boxes, especially for a Netflix original. Okay, my next pick is basically a horror movie. I think it does qualify, but it's much more of an art house film. If you go into Raw expecting a traditional horror movie, you're going to be sorely disappointed. But if you like creepy art films and you go into this one with low to no expectations, you are going to be pleasantly surprised. This director went on to do Titane, easily the most up movie of 2021, but Raw was released a few years earlier. But the basic setup is there's a young woman in college, more specifically veterinary school, and she ends up developing a intense craving for raw flesh. Now, this is not a vampire movie. This is a very original idea, and the way it's delivered is a pretty original delivery too. Like I said, it's an art house film, but if you like that kind of stuff, and you don't mind some incredibly disturbing imagery, then Raw is going to be right up your alley. My number 7 pick is far and away the only comedy on this list, but it does deserve this spot because it is seriously f***ed up, and it was directed by Jason Bateman. It also stars him in Bad Words.
Well, if you don't point that curry hole that way and sit your down in that seat, I'm going to tell the captain that your bag's ticking. Then you'll have a situation.
Now, this is a movie that has grown on me. I remember enjoying it back when I saw it. It was good for some laughs, but I've watched it a few times over the last couple of years, and it is an absolute riot, especially if you're paying very close attention. This is very well written. There's a lot of snappy dialogue. You're gonna catch most of it, but there's so much of it, you can easily overlook a lot of it if you're not paying close attention. Jason Bateman is not only fantastic in this lead role, I'm always a fan of his, but he killed it in this role more than he usually does, and he directed this movie. I thought he did a bang-up job. I wish he did more things like this, but as it stands, this is the only thing he's done like it, and it is still a solid watch all these years later. If you have not seen it, he plays an adult that finds a loophole and is able to compete in children's spelling bees. If that's not f***ed up enough, he really makes life hell for these kids, which sounds awful, like something you wouldn't want to watch. I agree, but Again, the way it's written really makes this thing work, and it is just a fun ride that ultimately sticks the landing, has a good ending, and goes somewhere. There's a point to all of the madness. Okay, my number 6 pick is a killer thriller movie from a top-tier director, Steven Soderbergh, and has some top-tier actors like Jude Law, Catherine Zeta-Jones, Rooney Mara, who's really the lead, and then Channing Tatum has a short-lived role in this.
There's been an incident.
What do we do?
No sign of forced entry, no sign of struggle.
Where's her lawyer?
She doesn't have one. Just kept talking about you.
Now, if you're a fan of Alfred Hitchcock style movies, not even necessarily his movies, but if you're a fan of those styles of thrillers, Side Effects is a fantastic one. In fact, it's one of the best in that genre available on Netflix now, hands down. It's got more twists and turns than you'll know what to do with, but because it's in the hands of some great actors and a great director, it really is delivered very, very well. You're never really lost in the weeds, and it is just a movie that will continue to surprise you. There's some deeply disturbing events that go on early on, and then the aftermath of that somehow becomes even more disturbing. Now, I will say, there are some movies on this list that are going to be too off-putting for most people, but if you're watching this video, this is one that will appeal to kind of the broadest audience. It's one of the more solid movies, less artsy, and certainly less stomach-turning than some of the other picks on this list. Before moving on to the top 5, I do want to tell you about a couple of honorable mentions that didn't make this particular list, starting with The Platform. The only reason this didn't make the list is because it was on my last video, but if you didn't watch that one, this comes from Spain. It's a sci-fi movie, takes place in this crazy prison. There's this endless levels. It's metaphorical, but it makes a lot of sense until it doesn't, but it's still a wild ride and a really cool Netflix original from Spain. A Scandinavian Netflix original, Against the Ice, almost made the list. In fact, this would have been my number 11 pick on this list. It is a fantastic story of survival. Great actors. It's shot pretty well for a Netflix original. And this one gets disturbing points because some of the survival scenes are, they're intense. But this is overall is a very solid movie. If you like survival type movies, this is one of the best I've seen in years. My number 5 pick on this list comes from another top tier director, one of my all-time favorites. Even though it's one of my least favorite movies of his, it still makes the number 5 spot on this list, The Phantom Thread. Now, this is the second to latest film from Paul Thomas Anderson and the last film that Daniel Day-Lewis starred in. In this movie, he plays a dress designer who marries a much younger woman, and he is an absolutely horrible husband to her. This is something that I think a lot of men can identify with, the way that they treat women at times, but the movie goes into a much different direction and it ends up being very disturbing. Now, I can understand why some people might not like the direction of this. It's very unusual, at least when you get towards the end of the movie, but I thought the strangeness of it actually saved this movie for me. I thought the movie overall was a little bit of a bore, even though the performances are fantastic. The look of the movie is just top-notch stuff. It is an incredible production. It's a little dull though, but once you get towards the end and you realize where it's been going, I personally was pleasantly surprised. I will say though, I give big points to movies like this that do something I've never seen before, and The Phantom Thread, again, saved itself with this kind of wild twist. But in the hands of Paul Thomas Anderson, it's pretty damn well delivered, and again, it earned the number 5 spot on a list of pretty excellent movies. But my number 4 pick is the only other Netflix original on this list, and it is one of the more surprising ones I've ever seen, The Perfection.
What's happening? What's happening? Oh my God. You know what you have to do.
Now again, this one earned massive points from me for doing something different. This also is the closest one to a horror movie, but it's very non-traditional. I only say that to say that in terms of Netflix original horror movies, this one not only stands out, it's one of the best I've ever seen, mainly because of the wild twists and turns and directions that it goes in. This is not a pretty movie. In fact, it's a little ugly and rough around the edges, and the performances are okay. They're not standout or exceptional in any kind of way, but the twisted nature of the story not only surprised me, but it made a lot of sense. And don't get me wrong, I'm not crazy. The story here wouldn't really work in the real world, but all the wild stuff that takes place in the profession serves the story incredibly well, and it ends up being a surprise of a Netflix original. If you've never seen this one, there's several stomach-turning moments in it, but just an overall excellent film. If you don't mind the stomach-turning stuff and you like creepy Twilight Zone type things, definitely check out The Perfection. Now, my number 3 pick is kind of an action movie, but it's much more of an intense thriller that is also pretty broadly appealing: No Escape. Now, this is one that was made for mass audiences. It came out in theaters. They pull some punches. It's not quite as intense as it maybe otherwise could have been, but still. Owen Wilson and Lake Bell go very against type. They play parents to a couple of young girls who are overseas when a coup breaks out. And even though they're not being targeted at any point, they are in grave danger, and there are some incredibly intense moments in this movie. The overall concept and idea here is what's most disturbing. I would say really this is probably the least disturbing movie on this entire list, but still, if you're a parent, the idea of being in any kind of situation like this has gotta be stomach turning, and it has some pretty fantastic action sequences in it, especially for a sort of family-oriented thriller. Don't get me wrong, the way I put that, this is not for families. It is rated R and again has some really intense moments in it. I'm just letting you know if some of the movies I've talked about are maybe a little too intense for you, you could start this list by checking out No Escape. But my number 2 pick is one of my favorite hidden gem movies currently available on Netflix, The Gift.
You think you're done with the past, but the past is not done with you.
Not only does this also star Jason Bateman, but this is a very dramatic role for him, so he's playing a little against type as well. Keep in mind, this came out before Ozark. And not only is he great in this movie, I mean, really one of his best performances. Rebecca Hall is fantastic. And then Joel Edgerton is also giving one of his bests. I'm a big fan of his, but he's playing a very strange character, and it's difficult to figure out what's wrong with him. Or is there something wrong with you? It's very tricky, and it's an interesting character he plays, but he also wrote this movie and directed it, and I think he did a killer job. This is a fantastic thriller. This and Side Effects would make an incredible double feature with all their twists and turns. They're both kind of these Hitchcockian style things, which I'm a big fan of, and just like some of the others on this list, The Gift nails it with the ending in an incredible way that I certainly did not see coming. The Gift is another great place to start. It is very disturbing, but it's also pretty watchable compared to some of the other ones on this list. However, my number 1 pick is not only the most disturbing movie on this list, it's also the artsiest, but in my opinion, it's also the best.
Nobody gets away with what she did. Nobody.
This was written and directed by fashion designer Tom Ford, who has only done one other movie, A Single Man. I think Nocturnal Animals is about as close to a masterpiece as you could get, especially for someone who's only directed 2 movies. This stars Amy Adams, Jake Gyllenhaal, and Michael Shannon, all doing bang-up jobs as their characters, and it has a very interesting setup that is easy to follow, but it's unlike anything I've ever seen before. And the basic setup here is that Amy Adams and Jake Gyllenhaal are divorced husband and wife, and they've both become successful in their own rights, and she is reading his latest novel, which seems like a veiled threat. Now, half of the movie, if not more, is actually the novel. Michael Shannon's character and Aaron Taylor Johnson, who is giving a career best performance. It's incredible what he does in this movie. He was robbed. He should have won every award possible the year this came out. But all those characters are in the novel, and it's sort of this West Texas thriller that does have a slow pace, but is incredibly chilling. I'm telling you, this one is going to upset some of you, but it's also a beautiful movie. It's shot incredibly well, amazing performances, and again, the story ebbed and flowed in a way I'd never seen before, and it was done beautifully. And I'll also say, not only is it the artsiest movie on the list and the most disturbing, But the opening credit sequence is one of the artsiest and simultaneously most disturbing opening credit sequences I've ever seen in a movie. So there's your warning for that. But that is the list. If you want even more movie recommendations across Netflix and other platforms, just check out some of my more recent uploads. But I will keep making videos like this as long as you keep watching them. Thanks for checking out this special disturbing episode, and you will see me on the next one.